Welcome back, everybody, to episode 10 of the Arch City Poker Podcast. My name is Tony, alongside Nick. And Nick, I hope you had a happy new year and a great holiday season. How you doing today?
Doing well. I think we're going to be talking about some thinking players, right?
We are. We're going to be talking about how we play against good or competent opponents. And the reason that we're going to be getting into this topic is simply because we have all the exploits on how to play against players that are limping too much, are calling too much, are folding too much. We have the bread and butter strategies for playing against bad people. But what do we do against somebody who doesn't have half of those weaknesses, or maybe they're showing a lot of the same play styles that you exhibit within your game? So how do you adjust and how do you interact with players like that? So we have a lot of different topics we're going to cover today, and that's going to actually lead us directly into that first question, which is, Nick, what do we think qualifies somebody at our table to be a quote-unquote good or competent player, meaning that this is somebody that we may need to adjust a little bit to?
I think somebody that you can tell has at least a pretty good foundation to their game. They raise first in pre-flop. They likely 3-bet with, outside of just aces or outside of like jacks plus and like ace king. Like they actually have a little balance to that part of their game. You can tell that they likely can do a little bit of hand reading post flop. Their sizings are at least somewhat reasonable. I think the guys that are, thinking players in the live low stakes games, they still make, I think sizing errors are where a lot of the majority of mistakes are made, even by thinking players or what we deem to be, good players or perceived good players. But I think the biggest thing is like the ability to, you can tell that they can exploit the fish, but they can basically install some semblance of balance when need be.
Yeah. Yeah, that rings true with probably how I'd feel as well. When I sit down at a table, and I'm sure you do the same thing, but I'm already taking a look. If somebody's limping, if they're limping a lot, I'm already kind of mentally categorizing them, kind of like how you do online when you see somebody who's bad. You might put like a little marker next to their name with notes that kind of indicates what type of player they are at a quick glance. And I do that when somebody limps a lot or somebody c-bets every single time. Like those are identifiers I use to determine like poor play. With good play, it's when they're not limping. If they're making a lot of opens, right? They're opening in a 1-2, 1-3 game to 10, 15, 20, and maybe they're even increasing their bet sizes when there's more limpers that were ahead of them. It just gives me an idea that they understand a little bit of table dynamics and how they're supposed to adjust to more people involved in a hand. I would also say what kind of makes a good player is you hit it right on the head, which is they can 3-bet with more than just aces, which sounds silly and it sounds like common sense, but nobody at live low stakes 3-bets outside of like aces, kings, queens, and sometimes ace king. Ace king is like 50-50 between a cold call and a 3-bet with a lot of this population. So yeah, when I see stronger opponents, I kind of mentally go back and I'm like, well, are they worth sitting on their left? I start thinking about ways that I can adjust to them. And Nick, when we've identified players that we deem are competent or strong, or insert a word that you think would be best to describe them, what are some of the adjustments that you like to make in your game that help you combat maybe stronger opponents mixed in the kind of melting pot of like good players and bad players at your table?
Yes, obviously a good question. I think the biggest thing is not overcompensating for the fact that they are maybe somewhat of a thinking player. I think one mistake I've seen in my coaching career is a lot of guys that I've worked with will give maybe too much respect to the perceived good player. We'll just say the thinking player. We'll keep it simple, guys, so I'm not sounding too redundant. But I would say if I do have to make any kind of adjustments, though, it will be implementing some semblance of balance post flop. So simple stuff like being able to check back some like top pair good kicker, being able to check back some draws, not just betting range in position like we would against a lot of fish, um, being able to play my range accordingly as far as like, let's say there's a flop that I'm not supposed to have connected very well with, then I'll play my range as such. Even if I have really good hands on that flop, I'll probably play those kind of similar to what I would with the majority of the hands that I'm supposed to have there, if that makes sense. Whereas with like the vast majority, the 95% plus of the population, I'm just kind of putting in these max exploits like we teach you guys over at the site and how like we've teach you on this very podcast throughout all the episodes so far. So yeah, Tony, I just implementing some balance, but not, I do want to caution you guys, not overdoing it though. It's not like Phil Ivey showed up at the table. All right. Like we still can play very exploitative, but you do need to have a little balance, not be as predictable, because the things that we teach you guys how to do against the vast majority of the population, they're very easily exploitable. That's the whole point of playing exploitative poker. You do leave yourself open to counters, but like I said, 95 out of 100 players, if not more than that, are not going to be good enough to, in fact, take that opportunity to counter you. But the few that are, if you realize you truly do have somebody that can counter, they can play back at you, or they understand, maybe it seems like they can hand read or they understand game theory on some level, then yeah, you hopefully understand balance and game theory a little bit, at least somewhat. And we teach you a little bit of that over at the site, but at least so that you can protect yourself in those spots as well.
Yeah, that's it. And boy, how do we adjust to somebody who's strong? I think when you said that it's not like Phil Ivey sitting down at the table, I think a lot of players would look at, like, if there's a 2-5 or a 5-10 game going on in their room, they would just automatically assume that players at those games are good or better, or that's where the skill is, or something to that effect. And that is...
Yeah, he's a 2-5 player. That's like what they will say. Like, he's a 2-5 player. They just assume because they're playing for more that they're better. And that's, true sometimes, obviously. But yeah, you're right. Like, it's the vast majority of 2-5 and 5-10 players, depending on what part of the country or the world you're playing in, like if it's a place where there are multiple 2-5s running every day, then there's likely a plethora of fish still. But if you're in an area of the world where 2-5's like one of the bigger games running and it's not running that often, then yeah, you might have the majority of the thinking players playing in that one small player pool, if that makes sense, guys. So, But Tony's right. Like, it's just because you see somebody on the 2-5 or 5-10 list or whatever. I mean, I've played in 25-50 games, and the vast majority of the players were horrendous just because they were just really rich whales that they're too bored to play anything smaller than that. But the few sharks that are in those games, they are incredible players. So it makes for an interesting dynamic the higher up you go.
Yeah. I mean, that's just it. When you're playing in a 1-2, 1-3 game, nobody is going to be like really, really, really good, because if they are, they likely wouldn't be playing in those games. They would have moved up. They would have had a bigger bankroll, and like, who knows, like, why they're playing 1-2, 1-3. But I would say from my experience, I don't really encounter strong, great play until I get to about 5-10. Maybe a little bit when I play 10-20, maybe that's where it's more regular to see very competent and like strong play. But 1-2, 1-3, 2-5, I mean, it's few and far between, honestly. So don't worry when you see somebody who's not limping in. That doesn't mean that we need to go inside of a turtle shell and then only open or 3-bet them with aces, kings, or queens. You can oftentimes look at it in a way that I do, which is there's finally somebody at the table who's opening more than just the best hands that you can get, which means that finally I get to now 3-bet with a larger part of my range versus having to like be very nitty against the traditional 1-2, 1-3 population. All the the stereotypical nitty players that when they open, it really just kind of limits what my 3-bet range is because it's just not profitable to 3-bet against the top of their range. So when somebody is decent and they're playing a decent hand range, we get to interact with them much more often. And I actually find it is a breath of fresh air.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I'll point out, and this is a good kind of like add-on for you guys as far as talking about how to adjust to like the thinking or stronger player. And Tony mentioned it, like you kind of need to see, for example, like he brought up like a specific example where let's say like they open and you believe they're opening much wider or they're positionally aware. Like that will be like a sign of a thinking player. Like you see them playing more hands in position. You see them not playing as many hands out of position, especially in the blinds when they're in these high rate games. If you're in a game with a drop, right, where they're have like terrible structure with bad rake, but you see them just positionally aware. So what that means is that they're very likely opening much wider from later positions. So those are guys that we can definitely look, even if they're better, we can look to attack them wider when they do get further in position because again, they're positionally aware. Whereas on the flip side of that, the fish will limp a ton of hands and they'll raise like the same good hands from everywhere. Like their gun range will be the same as their button range because they limp everything that's worse than like pocket nines and like the suited broadways, for example. The one thing I'll say though, and this is a very important part of this episode, it might be the most important part, is that even though we're able to attack maybe wider some of the time against the better players, you also are incentivized though. Let's say Tony and I are at a table and he opens under the gun and then somebody, a fish calls on the button. Let's say it's Tony and I and like 6 other fish at the table. I'm going to be incentivized a lot of the time, as long as I'm typically on the button or in the big blind where I have either absolute position or I'm closing the action. I'm going to be incentivized to actually 3-bet or squeeze far. It's usually a squeeze situation. I'm usually incentivized to actually call and not squeeze as often because the idea is I keep a fish in the hand who I can possibly destroy post flop and play for stacks very profitably against, as opposed to driving the fish out and now playing either in a 3-bet pot against another very good player like Tony or playing the 3-bet, 4-bet game, and a lot of times under realizing equity in that sense, especially if I'm out of position. So I'm not saying that all of a sudden I want you guys to start like cold calling from everywhere when you do have a good player that opens. But you do want to keep in mind that if you have situations where you guys especially are deeper stacked effectively with any of like the fish at the table, especially if it's a fish that's going to seriously overplay like a lot of one pair stuff, or you just know that you can stack them for a lot of money more often than, let's say, the thinking player, you're going to want to keep it. You're going to want to keep them in the pot if the good player is also involved, because it also makes, like in my example, it would make Tony play much more straightforward. Like, and not that he can't still play some poker, but it's harder to do when you're multi-way. Like everyone's just kind of mathematically going to be forced to play a little bit more polar and straightforward. So, yeah, Tony, I just want to point that out. Like it's good to be able to attack the wider ranges, or like, yes, we don't, if like a super nit only opens like 5% of hands, we're not able to really attack him as often pre-flop as we would say each other, but we're also incentivized to keep fish in the hand post flop as often as we can, especially if you're playing deep, live, low stakes poker.
Yeah, I almost wonder if that's a podcast topic in itself, which is, you and I battling a lot of the hands that we've played in together, because I oftentimes, and I told you this a million times, but when I play against you, or I'm at your table, or we're in a hand against each other, like it's so refreshing because it's one of the few times I actually get to use my brain and think, and I'm making so many more considerations to the hand as we navigate, right. And it's just more fun for me. I really love it.
Well, and I know later in the episode here, I don't know if it was the next topic or 2 questions from now, but I know that we're going to talk about kind of like sort of game selection with that, and like you mentioned, like it's good. You guys do want to seek out tougher opponents to play against, at least some of the time, because that's going to be the best barometer to figure out where your game's at. So
Yeah.
yeah, you always want to like keep fish in the pot, or you want to choose games with the fish most of the time. But it's good that in a room where there candidly just aren't a lot of great players, like where Tony and I play, it's good for us every now and then to seek each other out, because you get to kind of, like I said, test where your game's at.
Yeah.
Iron sharpens iron,
Yep,
basically.
that's exactly it. And just to kind of double back, and we're about to move on to the next question. But again, how do we adjust to people who are competent? First, we just have to be able to identify who they are, where they are in the
Yeah.
table, and just pay a little more attention to their actions that they take both pre-flop and post-flop, and try to figure out, just like Nick said, are they positionally aware? Are they opening up more from late position? Can we exploit that more with some three, like a little more light three bets? Um, are they somebody, because even if they're competent, they're still going to fit the same niche as everybody else, which is they're not going to bluff often enough, they don't check raise often enough, and they don't barrel rivers often enough for it to be bluffy, to enough bluff.
Yeah.
So they just still hold a lot of the same traits. They're just more, they're higher quality, probably pre-flop and on the flop, and then everything else probably starts to look the same, where the more money that's in the pot, the more straightforward they get. That's probably an easy adjustment. And if you find somebody at your table that you're just like, this player is just crushing the table and beating me in all these hands, then you can either A, seat change to their left, put yourself in a great position to play with them, or you can table change. And that's going to bring us to our next question, which is like, what makes a good profitable table? And if you are skilled enough to understand, maybe you understand who the players are in your room and you see them often enough to know, are they a fish? Are they like a money bag? Are they just fantastic to sit down with? Do they just dump a lot of chips when they get tilty? And you can see who those players are and you want to table change to them. Well, other quality players in your room might have the same idea. And if we're going to table change to profitable games, it's going to attract, just for the stereotypical terminology, like all the sharks are going to come to the fish. What actually makes a good table? Because if we end up sitting down at a table and there's 6 quality players and 2 bad players, does that make a good table? And Nick, what do you think about that? If you're at a table that the skill ceiling is just a bit higher, and maybe there is maybe still 1 or 2 bad players there, but if there's a table with 6 quality-ish players at it, surely that can't be where the best opportunity to make money is at your card room. But Nick, how do you deal with that, or what do you think about that topic?
I think it depends on the room. Maybe like, again, kind of going back to where you are in the country or where you are in the world. I mean, if you're down in Austin at the lodge and you're at a table with a few quality players, like, that room is so popular and has attracted so many players that seek action. But because of that, you're also going to get professionals that have either moved there or they travel there to play. You're probably going to have quite a few tables where you have some quality players, but generally speaking, the vast majority of the time, again, if you guys are playing 1-2, 1-3, 2-5, even some 5-10, you're, like if somebody says, oh, that guy's like a good player, I would say in my career, like over 90% of the time, that player's that they're referring to is likely not a good player. He might be good relative to the population. He might be like just less flawed, if you will. But generally speaking, most everybody is still pretty bad. Now, what makes a good table? Well, I mean, generally speaking, like action. If you just have like good amount of action, it doesn't have to be maniacal stuff or like 3 betting, 4 betting every single hand. But if you have a good mix of that, if you don't have a ton of limping and over limping, if you have, I think a lot of players would assume that I would want like 8 maniacs at my table. That doesn't make for a good table. That just makes for a craps game. I would rather have like 1 maniac, a few loose passives, maybe a few loose aggressives. Like, it's good. Tony mentioned it kind of honestly, guys, before we fired this up live, that I think diversity is like a good word for it. Like, you want to have a good mix of all player types. You generally, if you have more than one nit, that really does significantly hamper the game, I think, if you are playing 8 or 9 handed. But if you have one at the table, it's okay as long as the rest of the table is looking to play a little bit of poker. So hopefully a good mix. If stacks are deeper, that obviously helps, and action will be a byproduct of the players not being nits. But yeah, I mean, if you're in a room where it's a little bit quieter, and you might have just 3 to 4 tables running, or 5 to 6 tables, and there's just obviously one table that's the best table, and a few of the stronger players for that population have flocked to that table, just keep in mind, like, try to get the seat change button immediately, because you are, if you're a good player yourself and you're an Arch City Poker subscriber, you're going to be positionally aware. So try to get in position on the good players. Try to keep yourself involved in pots with the bad players as often as you can. If you think your skill level is equal to or inferior to at least one of the players at the table, those are the guys that you want to avoid a little bit more. Or if you can't avoid being in a pot with them, again, try to incentivize or keep a fish or multiple fish in the pot with you. It takes away the potentially better player skill edge, because now he has to play multi-way, and the more multi-way you are, the less that he can implement his skill edge. So there's a lot of things you can look to do at these, quote, like, better tables if you are stuck with some better players. But again, guys, like, I can't repeat it often enough. Like, the quote good players, if you've been learning from us long enough, we're going to teach you how to destroy them. Like, they might be better than the few other guys at the table, or even better than the majority of the room, but we're going to put you in a position to basically beat their brains into, just candidly speaking.
Yeah, I would say that there is there's no such thing as like a really, 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 really good 1-2 player that we just have to avoid. Like, it's just they're not often enough. Um, if you do find somebody that you think fits that player profile, you just have to look at the table that you are at or that they're at and figure out if it's a profitable decision to go there. And I can't tell you how many times your table selection will influence your ability to be profitable or have a profitable session.
For
If
sure.
if you play in the weekdays, if you play in the morning, it's likely the same crews. Maybe it's a nittier group of people. And yeah, you can still do exploitive strategies against that player population, but it's just a lot of limp folding from them. And it's just a very slow and meticulous grind. And if you're trying to play at the evenings, or you maybe are a Friday, Thursday through Sunday type of player, that's just where you're going to find a lot of opportunities to make a lot of money. And
Yep.
you don't, you just kind of want a little bit of everything. Just like Nick said, a lot of great diversity. You want maybe 1 or 2 other competent players. You want a couple really bad players, a couple people who just call too much. You just want a nice melting pot of everything, so your strategy is not hampered, and maybe there is some decision making you have to make. But if you're finding yourself at a table with 8 other Nicks, yeah, maybe not the best place for you to make the most amount of money. But Nick, that's going to bring me to my next question, which is, if you play 1-2, 1-3, Nick, and somebody sits at your table, how in the world would you expect them to adjust to you or play against someone like you at their table?
Good question. If you play with me a lot and you're watching this, then you're welcome, but I promise you that I'm going to counter you back. So the way that I think in all seriousness, I think we would start with trying to, like, I don't know, trying to be as unpredictable as possible without just doing random or taking random lines or actions just to be unpredictable, if that makes sense. Like, you do need to have some kind of balance against a player like myself. I will say that if you know, like, how the really good players, the guys that are really strong, loose, aggressive, to at times maybe perceived hyper aggressive guys, the way to get them in these live low stakes games is to simply understand how they're trying to exploit these types of games. So we talked, for example, about how we like to bet range on most boards for small in position, because we're able to clarify very well where our opponents are at in their range moving forward to turn and river after they complete their flop action, which is usually check call and then some check fold, very few check raise, right? Well, in that spot, we usually are planning to, for example, barrel a lot of turns and probably overbet and like overbet barrel a lot of turns. So the reason that we're doing that is that we know our opponents are very capped, they're very straightforward on the flop. So what I would do, and it's kind of similar to what we would do with like a maniac, for example, is I would start check calling more of like the top end of my range to be able to throw in that balance and that semblance of unpredictability. You basically want to take lines that it's almost like you are fishing in a way, making the better player or the pro like kind of bite at your line, and like you want to throw a line or an action or a sizing at him that will make him think one thing but you're really doing the other. So like you are going to throw a lot of like kind of reverse tells at him, so to speak. I would say the one spot where I will get in trouble in a live low stakes game, but it just doesn't happen often enough for us to ever worry about it, is if I do double or triple barrel and then at showdown, or if somebody didn't already go all in on the turn or river, like check raise or check jam or whatever, but they'll show me like sets or straights, and it might have been like a guy that I didn't know who he was, and he's just a super ultra nit, and he just played it really passively. Basically, they're just calling down with super strong hands. Whereas like the 99% of the population, when they're calling down, like we know they're super capped. We know we're obviously trying to blow them off of a cap range. So yeah, Tony, I would say just like some semblance of balance if you know how to implement it. If you don't and you're in doubt, just throw your opponent's sizings or lines that will reek of weakness, but be able to show up with your strong hands. And then I would reverse it. And this is very similar to how we would teach you guys how to play against a maniac, because the loose aggressive, really good players are going to be taking lines and using the info that they acquire to play similarly to the maniacs. They just aren't playing as many hands because it's just really hard to maximize your profit over 90% of hands as opposed to maybe 30 to 35% of hands. And so there's a little bit more discipline instilled with like the really good loose aggressive player. But going back to what I was saying, I would reverse the strategy then. So like if you guys are in a spot where you think your really good opponent is just betting range on the flop, whether it's in position or out of position, they'll do that a lot. Or if they double barrel turns, they often are not as narrow as you guys think they are. Those are good spots to actually throw in some check raise bluffs. And you can do it with some low equity draws. You can do it with like some second pair type of stuff that might block some of their top of range hands if they have like top two or they have sets, etc. So I would honestly reverse the strategy a little bit against a player like myself, and I would throw them like small leads that would make them want to make the good player pounce on that, or I would check call with like top of range a lot on the flop, or just maybe just call in position on the flop and then look to raise turn against their double barrel. They're going to put money in the pot for you. The vast majority of the time, the really good players will. Now, the thing is, if you don't know, if you're just throwing in these little like tricks or these reverse lines or sizings, if you will, if you're doing it just to do it and you don't know how to do it with any kind of balance, you're just like, well, I have a set and I would normally raise it against a player, but this guy, because he's a professional, like I'm just going to check call it. If you don't know why you're implementing some balance in the spots or how to use balance properly, like in later in the hand, that's something you'd have to work on your game more. And that's something you need to know how to do as you move up in stakes. But like Tony mentioned before, guys, if you don't have to run into this kind of player as often, then don't. Like game select well, seat select well, try to avoid these like spots where you're going to be at a disadvantage with that kind of player. But yeah, I think, Tony, you would echo similar sentiment as far as like where you get into trouble in a live low stakes game. It typically tends to be when somebody's kind of playing possum and you don't know they're the type of player that can do that.
Yeah. Boy, while you were talking, I was going through the Rolodex of what do I do versus Nick when I'm playing with him in a hand. And I was like, I was getting excited kind of sitting here. I'm like, oh, how much do I actually want to share though? But if Nick's going to share some stuff, I'll share some stuff. So when I play at a table with Nick, or if I find somebody who's at that skill level or higher, a lot of what you said is true, which is you will be aggressive on your own. I don't have to attack you. You will essentially put money in the pot yourself, and I kind of get an opportunity to interact with it. So, because I know that a good player is playing a larger part of his range from more positions, when you or somebody opens under the gun to $15, $20, whatever it is, I can still attack that with a larger part of my range because it's not just ace king, ace queen. Some of the combos that most live low stakes players will only open in from early position. I get the opportunity to be like, okay, well let's take sevens and we're going to make that into a 3-bet against his range, and then we're going to kind of navigate from there. But I often do a lot of 3-betting to try to isolate us heads up, because including fish in the pot with you is more than I'm trying to accomplish. I'm trying to, if you're the pre-flop aggressor, I want to focus on our dynamic heads up in a pot. And I oftentimes will try to isolate players heads up. I don't like playing multi-way. And especially if there's a good player in there. I know sometimes you'll drag along a fish to kind of like a way to get their money. I take a little bit of a different approach where, like, I want you heads up. I don't want the popcorn, like I don't want like a crowd in the hand where they're going to lead out of flow and I'm like, great, like now I have to make a decision with Nick Dak behind me, and it really kind of puts me now in an awkward spot. So I always like to isolate my opponent heads up. And then against you, it is some of the stuff that you said, which is if the flop is king high and Nick knows that maybe this board favors my range and I'm supposed to lead, it's going to be for small sizing to give him a chance to attack it. And oftentimes you don't, because you know that we're thinking kind of the same thing. But I like to give you opportunities to have aggression in lines that make sense. And then I oftentimes think about, when you're making flop or turn sizings, where that's going to leave our stack sizes. So if I call the turn, he's probably going to shove the river. So let's think about what action I need to take now. Is it more profitable for me to just shove the turn, like over his bet, so I don't have to deal with like a really innocuous kind of river card or a river jam or something to that effect? So I'm trying to think on future streets. I'm trying to think about your hand range. And I'm also trying to think about how you think I would then perceive the game. So it's kind of like a chess match. And I think that's what I really enjoy about it. And we don't really get that opportunity against that many different types of players. When you're playing in a traditional 1-2, 1-3 game and somebody decent's doing some shenanigans, you can really default back to basics and kind of outperform and outplay them, which is understanding what the SPR is, understanding what actions they took pre-flop to kind of get a generalization of their hand range. People often aren't going to call down with sets or over pairs. They're going to let you know pretty often and pretty frequently where they're at ahead of time, so you're not surprised by that stuff. And then, like Nick said, we oftentimes get surprised by that kind of stuff because people don't like feeling uncomfortable. So if Nick and I try to place people in situations where they are uncomfortable, they kind of go inside of a turtle shell and then they'll just check call aces all the way down because they just don't want to be blown off their hand. They don't know what to do on flush completing boards. They don't know what to do on 4-card straights, and they just kind of lock up. So I think the best approach would be for somebody to just play from position, try to either table change away from us, or if you're going to interact, make sure the hand selection that you have is useful. You don't need to open up your range to 7-10 suited or 7-jack suited. Keep it somewhat comfortable for yourself. And I would say maybe suited gappers is about as far wide as you probably need to go to have like a profitable decision tree ahead of you that doesn't put you in an awkward spot. So, Nick, there's a lot that I'm trying to like unpack in that short amount of time, but yeah,
I'll add on real quick. Yeah, I'll add on that. So like, what you guys need to understand too is that if you have a player that is like we've been saying the whole episode, a perceived thinking player or good player or aggressive player, or if it's somebody that you know is like somebody like me or like Tony or a professional, um, you can attack them in some spots where like they're in the live, like if it's a live low to mid stakes game, they're going to like we're kind of programmed to, for example, to like overfold to obvious strength. Overfolding to three bets is something that we would do against like maybe a tighter population or a more loose passive population. Like if it's a day crowd, like Tony was saying, across the country, like a lot of the day crowds with the retired guys or the older guys will be similar or play, the same way. But um, you need to keep in mind that if you're going to start attacking a really good player more liberally, and you start three betting them, like especially if we're talking pre-flop, they are like if it's like a legitimate good player, they are going to adjust quickly and put the screws to you. So like you're gonna face a lot of four bets. And like if you're not real comfortable with your three bet, four bet, five bet game, if you're not comfortable with the check raise three bet game post flop, like those are parts of the game tree that aren't talked about all that often in the live low stakes games because they don't need to be. Like there's no sense to like study those spots really hard because generally speaking that the 99% of the population is just like so incredibly ABC. It's you either if you have it you continue, if you don't you fold type of stuff. So I just want to make it clear to you guys that you can't attack players like us because we are opening wider, we are three betting wider, we are betting and barreling post flop wider, we're check raising wider. But you need to be cautious that like if you start doing it enough and a really good player catches whim of it, like a legitimate good player, they are going to play back at you hard. And because they're programmed to be able to do that and they, we have the skill set to do that. So, the good thing is it's not to scare you guys. It's not to discourage you from getting involved with those players. It's just kind of what we said though, like be positionally aware yourself, seat select, game select well. Try to get involved with the fish at the table more so than that player if possible. But come over to archstatepoker.com and we will teach you how to be able to play at the level that we're at so that you don't have to worry about that to begin with.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly it. At 1-2, 1-3, even 2-5 and 5-10, there aren't four bet bluffs often enough. Like there are three bets. There's a lot more three bets the higher up you go, but there's not four bets. There's not.
No, like in our room, I'm the only one that four bet bluffs. If besides, like, I'm not talking about you, but like, yeah, like that's like, I'll give you guys an example. Like if Tony three bets me in position, let's say it's like a button versus cutoff dynamic, and I'm cutoff, he's button. If I open, he three bets. If you guys have like King 10 suited or Ace 10 suited, those are hands that you guys like. You might think to yourself, well, I can't just get run over by Tony or Nick, so I think I'll just call here. But like some of you would just kind of honestly pucker up and be like, well, I just don't want to play a big pot with him out of position, so I'm gonna cut my losses here and I'm just gonna fold. Four betting's the way to go there. Like that's what I'm talking about. Where like you guys are this is kind of uncomfortable situations we're talking about, but uncomfortable situations will lead to growth. And so the good thing for you guys is I have many years of going through these situations and learning how to navigate them to where I've already done that for you. And you can come over to the site and then Tony and I will show you what we're talking about. We'll give you proper four betting ranges. We'll give you what to do post flop. If you do get check raised, like how do we continue to get somebody that actually doesn't have just the nuts? Like we're going to be able to continue with some calls or some three bets. So yeah, like you said, Tony, there's through this last question within this episode, there's a good amount to unpack, but if we're going to just say it in a vacuum, you want to play with fish as much as possible, but iron sharpens iron. You do want to seek out the good players. Sometimes you do want to there are going to be spots where it's just inevitable or unavoidable as far as, playing pots with these guys. And it's just about, again, not being so predictable. Don't make yourself exploitable if possible. But if you think they're playing a very exploitative strategy and you know what they're doing, then you can throw some exploitative counters back at them. And, we talked about a few of those on here, but we can teach you how to do that over at archstatepoker.com.
Yep. You're hitting it right on the head. I guess my final takeaway, or the message that I would give to live low stakes players, would be nobody you're playing with is good enough to 4-bet bluff. Like
No,
hardly ever. So
no.
if somebody is good and they're 3-betting a lot, that's about the extent of what their aggression can do and tolerate. If you 3-bet and they 4-bet, you don't have to then be like, well, can I call here with ace queen against against his range because he's so aggressive? No, because he's just not 4-betting often enough for your decision to include lower parts of your range. 3-betting is about as aggressive as live low stakes go, and even then, it's few and far between for the people who do it. So your takeaway would be 4-bets are still immensely strong all the way up until 5-10. And I would say that if somebody is 3-betting way more often than what you think is normal, like maybe once in orbit, maybe twice in orbit, like it just feels like a lot, your reaction to that is 4-betting. It's not cold calling his 3-bets, it's 4-betting. People cold call 3-bets way too often. So again, to dumb it all down, people aren't aggressive often enough. When people start 3-betting who don't 3-bet very often, treat it with a lot of strength. When people 4-bet, it's usually the nuts. If you come into someone like Nick or I, probably every once in a while, you probably just either want a table change or you're just going to have to get comfortable with 4-betting. But otherwise, Nick, I mean, this is a really kind of a fun topic and exciting one. But otherwise, Nick, do you have any parting words or wisdom for everybody else listening today?
I think we covered it. I mean, like you said, you guys will have to get comfortable with 3-bet, 4-bet with the good players. But I think the biggest thing is with a thinking player overall. I said it in the beginning, said it a little bit here and there throughout this episode. They might be perceived to be, they might be one of the better players in the population, but it doesn't mean they're a good poker player. Humans innately are bad poker players. The solvers, if you guys ever saw like a solver play against, like if you see like bots that are solver approved playing against other bots, like it's a pretty incredible thing to watch. Like it's an incredibly hyper aggressive post flop. It's pre-flop's pretty standard stuff. Like you guys are familiar with pre-flop matrices or whatever. Like it's gonna play pretty much to a T, like what's supposed to be happening. But for the most part, guys, like you don't have to probably really sweat the thinking players too much. There's just some stuff that you have to do a little differently, and we pointed that all out throughout this episode.
Absolutely. And again, if this is your first time listening, head on over to archcitypoker.com. We have tons of great Pot Limit Omaha and No Limit Texas Hold'em content for you to consume. We also have an X page where we'd like to repost, likes, comment on some of the posts that we have. If you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead, share, like, and subscribe to our channel as we try to continue to provide quality content for all those trying to get better at the games we all love of Pot Limit Omaha and No Limit Texas Hold'em. And one last thing is we do have a Discord channel, which is a great opportunity for you to share hand histories, for you to highlight your implementation. Maybe you've tried something that didn't work that we recommended, and we can go through those things together. So again, if you haven't checked out YouTube, if you haven't checked out X or Discord or archcitypoker.com, we have plenty of ways to help you be a better player. And again, that's going to wrap up our episode 10 here today. Thank you everybody for listening, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.